Hi everybody, welcome to Surel's Place. I'm greeting both a small audience that's here at the house and also any of you that are watching at home. I'm Jody Eichelberger, the program director of Surel's Place. I do want to acknowledge a couple of people who are here with us tonight. We of course have Executive Director Greg Hahn, who is our tech guy tonight, running multiple laptops and spinning lots of dials. He's our disco DJ. We also have Marnie Elmore, our staff assistant, who is operating one of the cameras. We have Winston Mitchell, who is our photographer, who is documenting the night. And then we also have a couple of board members here tonight. We have Eve Marie, who is one of our co-presidents. And we also have Greg Mizuta, who, in addition to being a board member, also hosted our guest artist tonight, which is something anyone in the community can do if you're interested in being a host. That really doesn't mean that you are providing them with the shelter. It just means that you are their link to the community, taking them to events that they might be interested in. And then Julie also just sat down here, another one of our board members. So we appreciate you all tuning in to be part of this. And we're excited to be able to continue to offer residencies. Jean earlier actually participated in First Friday with an older installation that she quickly set up and had in the house that people could interact with. And that is one of the events that's coming up again, is First Friday. Every First Friday until December is the plan. And we also offer Friday night art at the Greenbelt Market just by the wave along the river. And that will continue through October 22nd. We have some more residencies coming up, possibly starting as early as next week, but we might be pushing that one into October, and that's a very different residency for us. It exists in the metaverse primarily. Her name is Kathleen Cohen, and she is exploring storytelling in extended reality, which covers more than you think. It's not just virtual reality, it's also other kinds of reality, and how do we represent art in that, and how do we interact as communities. Her program will incorporate satellite in University of Idaho in Moscow with indigenous people, and also a program here in Boise that works with autistic people. And then our final event is going to have something to do about those two communities representing themselves in the metaverse and meeting each other there, and we'll somehow be there to witness it. If I'm being a little vague, it's because I don't completely have comprehension of it yet myself. So you can always find all these events on our website, surelsplace.org, where you can also click the top banner to be added to our e-newsletter. And also on that page is a way for you to give. We are not endowed and are always grateful to donations that come in to us, so thank you for that. Tonight we're back in the back garden. The installation is inside. For those of you watching online, you'll be able to hear the artist talk now, and then we do have a video for you that we made yesterday, maybe shortly after Jean put the final touches on. So you'll have a chance to kind of virtually walk through, we're already in the metaverse, virtually walk through that installation and see that. And then we're all going to be together again for a Q&A. So as usual, if you have a question about something that you hear, just type it into the chat and we'll read those out at the end. Jean actually started as a student of science and architecture at a casual program at a place called MIT, and that was back in 2016. She moved from there to get her Master of Arts at the University of California, Irvine, and has focused on photography, but also playing with light and paper. And I have often thought of this as where poetry likes to be, is when we try to describe something that we don't quite have words for, and poetry it's more about what is between the words in some cases than the words themselves. Well, I feel like Jean Shon is kind of in that space too, where she's trying to touch something that we can't quite articulate with language or image, and it exists in multiple planes with negative space and positive space and shadow and light. It deals with identity and both past and present, and she's going to share with you kind of the progression of how she reached that place and then you'll have a chance to experience for yourself. We're going to let you in little groups of 2, I think, to go experience that. So I'm very excited to be able to have you all get to hear some insights from the artist herself, Shon.
Thank you, Joey. I think you described my work very well. And thanks to everybody came here and is also tuning in. And I want to thank Surel's Place for giving this opportunity to create work. And also my host, Greg, who has been very generous and has really welcomed me to places. So thanks to everybody. So before I talk about my installation on View, I did want to go over through some formative projects that have kind of you can see the progression and how it's grown to what I have today. So I began with photography, and I started getting serious about when I started taking photos of my parents. At the time, they had a motel they ran in the middle of Louisiana, so I would go visit them a couple of times a year to help them out. So after a couple of trips, I would, take photos, and then I started seeing sort of narrative emerging from the photos. I could really see all the struggles that my parents went through as small business owners, and the mundane shift work, just like doing the same thing, just cleaning up, fixing things every day. And then they felt very isolated, kind of stationed in this town where we grew up in Texas, so they didn't really know this area very well. And I think they felt a little bit trapped in a place where they couldn't really get comfortable and call home. And I certainly felt this discrepancy between my life and my sister's lives and of my parents. And then my father was suddenly diagnosed with brain cancer, and so his condition declined pretty rapidly, and I spent most of my time taking care of him and watching over him. And I could see how this disease really took a toll on his body, and so I wanted to show the frustration and the challenges that he experienced with his condition and that we experienced as a family. And when he passed away, I had all these questions of whether this was the American dream that he really wanted for himself and his family. And so during this time, I really wanted to I felt this pull to learn everything about my family history, and I started making sure I wanted to preserve my family's archive, photographs and letters and any sort of memorabilia that they had lying around. So I found these letters that were sent between my father when he was in America and my grandmother and my mother when they were still in Korea. And so at first, I was really just taken aback by the physicality of these letters. I wish that you could see them a little bit more clearly, but there's a lot of folds and fading and stains, and I just thought it was really beautiful. And so as I was looking through these letters, I was really kind of placed in the middle of this very intimate exchange between these two people that I felt like a little bit of an intruder. And so there was a little bit of relief that there was a language barrier, so I couldn't really understand everything. Just a couple of English words and phrases here and there. So with this work, I redacted all the text that was on, that you can the front side of the paper, and because that's not really what I could understand. And I allowed the bleed to come through. You can't see it quite that well with the projection, but let me see if you can see it a little bit better in this one, where you can see the writing on the other side. And there's this, I like this exchange where, there's this sort of illegibility when, as the viewer. And so I did this with a couple of letters that you can see. And this next project was called Father and Father. So my grandfather was killed during the Korean War a couple of months after my father was actually born. So there's really no memory of him at all in my family. And the only thing that we had was this tiny photograph of him. It's about, an inch by an inch tall or so. And because this was kind of the only remnant that we had of him, it was very loaded with meaning. There's a lot of things we projected onto it, a lot of speculation that we kind of, wondered what kind of person he might be. And so I really thought about, the archive and how they're very dynamic spaces and places where you can kind of construct shape and meaning and memory, and it's kind of what you want to take out of it. And even if we have little pieces and little fragments, it's how we decide to create the narrative. And so with this small photograph, you can see this is the first one and the fourth one. I just wanted you to maybe be able to see it a little bit better. I Xeroxed it, and then a little bit bigger, and then I cut it up into these tiny rectangles, and then I glued it back together, and then I copied it again, and then I repeated the same process of cutting it and then assembling it back together 4 times. And with each copy, you can kind of see the deterioration and the degradation of the photo. And you can see how much it's changing, and where some things are getting harder to read, some parts are blown out, but then there's other parts that are actually a little bit sharper, and because of the contrast. And so with this, I thought about the oral histories and stories that kind of get passed down from generation to generation, and you can see how things some things you kind of forget, or they get lost and faded away in memory, or there's that one story that keeps on getting told and might get bigger and better with each passing. So I was thinking about this sort of translation that happens. And so this brings me to my thesis installation that I had last year, and this is when I started using paper and light. And you can see from the previous projects that I just showed that it wasn't always about the material. It's really just about, I'm looking for the best way to materialize my concepts and ideas. And, whether it was photography or these new ways of making images. So with this project, it actually first came from writing poetry. And I was reading through some of my father's journals, and by reading I mean my mother was translating it for me. And I could really relate to a lot of the sentiments that he had, talking about loss and guilt and homeland and displacement. And so I wrote these call and response poems using all these different voices. I was thinking about the written words, the translations, transcription, and I just really want to connect all this, the variety of voices that kind of with between the past and the present. And with this, I was thinking about the idea of haunting. This feeling that's present, but you can't necessarily see it or touch it, but it's there. And even if it's something that's hidden, there's always some traces of something that might be left, and that might discover at some point. So there's always little bits and pieces and fragments and things that that are always kind of left lying around if you're looking for it hard enough. And so I was thinking about these spaces and these in-between spaces, and it's something's sort of familiar but also really strange. It's kind of like when you go back to your hometown and it's completely different, but some things you can kind of recognize again. So I kind of want to explore that in this work. It's more of like a feeling or an aura, this a liminal space. And so I wanted to use light because I wanted to capture something that was more ephemeral. Light is something that can take up a ton of space, but actually it's not taking up any space at all. So I want to work with something like that. I want to work with movement. So I chose this paper that was kind of fragile, but also, durable enough. It was not opaque, but it wasn't translucent either, so it's something in between. And it's really affected by the elements that are surrounding it. So by people, by your footsteps, or moving your body. And they're also it's very simple. These very two just simple materials that can be manipulated. And I cut the text into the paper. This one I used a laser cutter, but for some of the other ones I just hand cut them. And I was thinking about this negative space that Jody so eloquently talked about, because I thought about all the ruptures and gaps that we have in our history, about our knowledge in the past, because there's a lot of things we don't know, and the missing is actually really important. And I know that we're always trying to search for those missing pieces, but it's we don't have to really focus on the thing that's gone. It's just we know that negative space is there. And so that we turn that into something positive. So obviously with the light, what you can read is actually the positive, the negative space. And so, we're using, the information that we don't have to create a connection. And it's just a new way of trying to understand something. So as I was making this work, I thought I was trying to find a way to kind of move forward from the past, but I was reading about melancholy and how it's actually an essential state of being rather than something that you're really trying to move from or move past. It's actually sitting with it and recognizing that it's there and that it's okay. So with this, I was rethinking about loss and suffering and memory in a way that's more productive, and creating a space where you can embody all of these things and honor them. So this is a project I did at a residency earlier in the summer. It was at an old paper mill in Michigan that was it's long not been a paper mill. It's being refurbished into a huge event space. So I thought, obviously, that's very relevant to what I'm working with. Mm-hmm. And so when I got there, I wanted to incorporate the history of the space. And you can see that, I kind of made the profile of what would be like a paper-making machine. And what I really wanted to do was, make sure I incorporate the history of the people that kind of made this space possible. And the people who worked there were immigrants from Poland that came from Chicago. And so what I did was create a distorted map that of the railways from Chicago to Michigan, and the line work was made from the plants and the flowers and things that were growing around the mill today. And so what I really wanted to do was kind of combine this sort of past history with sort of the future of what is there. And this is just some detail. And so now that brings me to my work here at Surel's place. And I was also interested in bringing the memory and legacy of Surel, what she has left behind here. And I was looking through her collection of books, and I found some poetry that really spoke to me. The first is this book, "The City in Which I Love You" by Liam Lee, and then "Redbird" by Mary Oliver. So if you're not familiar with them, you can take a look after the presentation. And the first thing that I really loved about looking at these books were the handwritten sort of inscriptions that whoever gifted this to her had. And so I love this sort of personal touch, and I think it was this opening for me to kind of get a glimpse into her life, a very small sliver. And so I decided to use two poems by each author in my work, for the text of my work. And the reason why I chose Liang Li was because he touched upon a lot of the subjects that I'm already interested in, remembrance and love and childhood and his relationship with his father. And what I appreciate about his style was that it's very descriptive and it's very present in the moment. Um, so his poem "With Ruins" is a, it talks about a specific place in his memory with his father, and he, like in the past, and he's sitting with this, and so he actually is talking about melancholy, and he actually writes, "Melancholy is useful. Bring yours." And so it's like, oh wow, this is exactly like how I'm processing as well. And the second poem is "This Room and Everything in It," and here he's still sitting in this place of memory and melancholy, and he's really trying to, as I read this poem, he's really trying to understand this space. And I thought his poems were a nice contrast to Mary Oliver's poems, which um, they actually talk a lot about the same thing, like the bigger like concepts, but um, Mary Oliver does so in a more broader or like a grander sense. She's a little bit more abstract in the way she writes, and so her poem "Boundaries" um, talks about this idea of home. Like this line says, "Where is it? I ask, and then my feet know it." And so it's this place of comfort that you just know very well. And then the second poem is "What is the Greatest Gift?" And this one is kind of the idea, as you can tell from the title, of something kind of bigger and greater than us. And so I designed the text of the poems in sort of a wave formation on the screens on the paper, and it's kind of reminiscent of the green belt over here because it's kind of inspired by the things around me. And I also like it because you can sort of read the fragments and kind of sentences here and there. You can of all 4 poems at once if you want to. But if you wanted to read it more in a linear fashion, then you can kind of like walk around the installation. But then it actually will take you back into a circle, which is not linear at all. And I kind of, it's because time isn't always linear. The past always kind of comes back up again. And so I wanted the viewer to kind of circle it, and when you're facing it, you kind of feel this distance, and you're outside looking in. But once you kind of get inside, you can, you're kind of surrounded by the screen on one side and the shadows on the other, and it's just a little more, a smaller and more intimate space. And I wanted this space to feel very immersive, and I wanted to create a space that you can read these poems and hold these ideas and raise some questions about what this might mean for you, and just be absorbed in the surrounding. So it's a space of meditation and reflection. So I invite all of you to take a look at the exhibition.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
I actually really love that light is such an important part of your work, and you were able to present this with this golden light coming from our fall setting sun. That's wonderful. So now is your opportunity to get a little bit of a peek of the installation. As I mentioned, was pre-recorded earlier, and so we're going to cut to that now, and then after that we'll be back with you for you to have an opportunity to ask your questions. And now I'm talking to you guys. Welcome back. The light has changed a little bit since you left us. I hope you enjoyed that little excerpt of the walk through Jean Shon's piece, Suspension Connection. We'll just have a few moments to ask a couple of questions, and Jean has her jacket on now. You want to come over here? Great. Does anyone have something that you wanted to inquire about right off? And if you're at home watching, just type that in the comments, and I'll be looking here to see that I can find your comment. Anybody here have something they wanted to ask? One thing I might just start off with, and then we'll get to Trisha's question, is sometimes that we just need to revisit the very basic idea of an installation. Because people are used to an exhibition where it has art that you purchase and take home with you, and someone hangs it on their wall. But how do installations, just in general, like, where do they live after you take this down? What happens to it?
Well, for me, they just are rolled up and in a box in storage. But I guess with my work, it is difficult to show again sometimes because it's very specific to the space that I first showed it, and also because of the history of the space. It is very particular. So it sort of depends on what kind of installation it is. But for now, most of my stuff is just in storage.
I guess you were able to bring one piece out again
Yeah,
earlier,
was,
so
that's
that was
true.
an example. Were you familiar with the poetry, those poets before? And you just found, I love that you just were looking at the bookshelf and just found these poets, but what was your experience with those poets before?
I actually I'm a little bit familiar with Mary Oliver's stuff, but I haven't heard of Li Ying Li, and so I
Oh,
was really happy to have discovered that book.
oh, cool. Trish?
Well, my question actually kind of dovetails into yours, or kind of goes overlaps with what you asked, Jody. But I was just wondering because you make your installations specific to where you're at, and I was just thinking your timeline and how do you find that inspiration, and do you have some vague idea before you come, or do you just keep a total open mind and you just know it when you see it, but you have to find it by a certain time to be able to create it? How does that work? What does that feel like? Is it a huge pressure thing, or are you just kind of give yourself a couple days to get connected and then it just occurs? What's been your experience with that?
And I think people could hear you over our mic, but the basic question is, you're coming to a place to do an installation, but how much work happens in advance?
No, it's a good question. I think it sort of depends on the residency or the space, but I do have vague ideas of what I might want to incorporate, but it's more ideas of I want to make sure that I research this while once I get to the space, because I do want to make it very personalized. And so, yeah, usually the first couple of days, I kind of took some time to actually just get to know the area, bike around the green belt and, look at all the art in the house and just things like that where, and then I kind of, hopefully something will speak to me. And there is a little bit of pressure for a shorter, this residency is a little bit shorter, but yeah, once I connect with something, I try to, kind of harness it and use it. So.
Thank you. Yes?
So how long does it take to actually cut out a long, when you're working on that, is that hours and hours to do one, or does it go pretty quickly, and do you get tired, and are you very careful about how much text you use because you're thinking of what that rate is?
Yeah, so for instance, the section, I'm going to paraphrase it, but I don't know where home is, but until I stand there, or something like that. Like, how long would that phrase like that take to cut out?
Yeah, it kind of varies. It takes a little bit of time to actually design it because I always design everything on my computer first, and then I usually project it, and then I start the cutting process. And I think once I get started, it can kind of go quickly, but it definitely takes time, and it can be kind of physically, tiring. So I try to space it out where I can't work for like 5 hours at a time, because otherwise, like, it would be too hurtful. But I try to, do a balance of things where I'm like, if I'm designing it and then I'm cutting it, or then I'm tracing and projecting. So I try to, kind of squeeze other things in there.
Good. I'm not seeing any questions from our online audience, but if you do have a question, type it out now so it gets to me. Anything else from our peanut gallery here in the driveway of the back garden? Sam?
Have you, was there a process in finding the material that you used to carve, like to cut out the paper? Did you play with different papers? Does that vary from site to site, or do you have a preferred type of paper to work with?
So the paper itself, you mentioned like using a really light, fragile paper. The question is the paper different for different installations, or was there a path in finding the right paper?
Yeah, there was definitely a selection process when I first started working with paper, and I tested out a lot of different types of paper. I went to like this Japanese specialty paper store in LA, and I tested a lot of different kinds, and some were really beautiful. You can see like the fibers, or some that were like crazy delicate, where it's very easily torn. So I really needed a balance, and I actually decided, like, the paper I'm using right now is tracing paper, and it's like kind of so simple that I didn't think of it at first. But I actually decided on it because it was the most unassuming, actually, because I didn't want the focus to actually be the paper itself. And so this just traced paper just happened to work out the best. And it was nice because it comes in rolls instead of like sheets, or other variabilities. But the roll works very nicely, so it doesn't have to be a certain length.
Wasn't there an architect who had kind of a famous quote about I'm trying to design a building that's so beautiful you don't see it? Or something like that?
I haven't heard of that, but
I
like it.
Something like that. Lou?
Jody, when I was inside, and I noticed, because it's dark outside and we're using spots, we had shadows on the wall. And that was added this whole other dimension as you walk through it. Sometimes obscured the shadow. And then right now on the screen is the shadow of the leaves, sort of brought to show somewhat outside with you.
Yeah.
Lou, who lives across the street from Surel's place and has been a longtime supporter, is pointing out how we were replicating what's happening inside with the installation and the shadows on the walls with the shadow on the screen right here. Well, and actually, you're going to be rolling this paper up tonight, I guess, right?
Yeah, I'm leaving tomorrow morning.
Jean is flying back to California tomorrow morning, so we really condensed it right here at the end with a final event, installation, art talk, and then fly away with her paper rolls in tow. So thank you so much for coming here and doing this work. And I found it really special that you, even though it's such a short time, you put in the resources to think about how you were going to highlight the history of this place and the environment of this place, and to find the poems and the inscriptions of the books and the shape of the greenbelt. That just really honored us with your installation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And good night, everybody.